Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. So, we really appreciated you sending over that YouTube video, the one about boosting your critical thinking skills.
Mm-hmm.
Instantly boost your critical thinking skills. Yeah, it's from that Book Insight channel.
Right.
And it really got us thinking, especially that opening question they posed.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's kind of stuck with me, and it's what we're going to be exploring today.
It's a good jumping off point for sure.
So we want to dive into the core ideas about, well, how we think.
Hmm.
How our thinking gets shaped and how we can maybe take a bit more control over that process.
Sounds good.
So the heart of the video is really about giving you, the listener, just the most important stuff, the need-to-know information. And we want to do that without, overwhelming you with too much information.
Yeah, digestible chunks. Right. That's what
Well,
we're aiming for. Bite-sized insights.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just jump right into it. The question that got us hooked was, what if many of your beliefs, the ones you hold so dear, the very things that guide your decisions, what if they weren't entirely yours?
It's a thought-provoking question for sure. Makes you kind of stop and think, doesn't it?
Right. It's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie,
Sort of, yeah.
Like, who's really in control here? But the video actually presents a pretty compelling argument that our minds, whether we realize it or not, are constantly being influenced.
Absolutely. It's almost like a constant tug of war for our attention and our beliefs.
And the video does a good job of outlining just how many different forces are at play here.
Oh, there are so many. It's almost overwhelming when you stop to think about it.
Like, we've got societal pressures, the media, political agendas, corporations trying to sell us stuff, even like influencers on social media.
Right. It's coming at us from all directions.
Right.
And it's not always a level playing field either.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? A lot of this is happening beneath the surface without us even consciously realizing it.
It's like subliminal messaging on steroids.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in, right?
Exactly. It's almost like a defense mechanism in this information-saturated world.
It's about taking back control, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The video frames it as a question of agency. Are you the captain of your own mental ship? Or are you drifting along with the current, being steered by external forces?
And, the video doesn't shy away from the fact that there are a lot of forces out there trying to steer us in certain directions.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's got an agenda these days.
So how can we be more mindful of that and really be the ones in the driver's seat?
I think a big part of it is just being aware that it's happening in the first place. Recognizing that we're constantly being bombarded with messages and influences, many of them designed to shape our thinking in specific ways.
Okay, so awareness is key. But then there's also this idea that our own brains sometimes work against us in this whole process.
Our brains are amazing, but yeah, they do have their quirks.
Right, like the video talked about how we're wired for shortcuts. Our brains love to find patterns, to latch on to things that feel right, even if they might not be entirely accurate.
And we're all about efficiency, right? Our brains are constantly trying to conserve energy. And those shortcuts, those mental heuristics, often served us well in the past.
Like way back in the day when survival was the main game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Quickly recognizing a pattern could mean the difference between grabbing a meal or becoming one.
Makes sense. But how does that work against us now in today's world?
Well, we're dealing with so much information, so much complexity, that those shortcuts can sometimes lead us astray.
Like, we might jump to conclusions based on limited information.
Or we might fall prey to confirmation bias, only seeking out information that reinforces what we already believe, even if it's not entirely accurate.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like our brains are trying to save us mental energy, but sometimes that can lead to some, well, not so smart decisions.
The key takeaway here is that those shortcuts, those mental heuristics, are super efficient, but they're not always accurate. And in today's complex world, we need to be extra careful about not letting them lead us astray.
Right, so it's all about being aware of those shortcuts, those biases that are baked into how our brains work.
Exactly. We need to be mindful of those tendencies and take steps to counter them.
And then there's the whole dopamine thing, right? The video talked about how our brains get this little reward, this hit of dopamine, whenever our existing beliefs are confirmed.
It's almost like our brain is giving us a pat on the back for being right. Good job, you confirmed your bias. Here's some dopamine, feel good about yourself.
And that feels good, obviously, but it makes it even harder to look at things objectively, doesn't it?
It does. It creates a kind of feedback loop where we're constantly being rewarded for staying within our comfort zone, for sticking to the familiar, for not questioning our existing beliefs.
So it's almost like we're being biologically programmed to resist new information, to avoid challenging our own views.
It's not quite that simple, but there's definitely a biological component at play here.
Right. Okay, so given all of that, what's the first step to breaking free from those patterns, those biases, that dopamine trap?
The video really emphasizes the importance of intellectual humility as a starting point.
What does that mean exactly?
It's about recognizing that you don't know everything, that you might be wrong, and that's okay.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like admitting that you don't have all the answers before you can even start asking the right questions.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's like acknowledging that you might be lost before you can start looking for directions.
that makes a lot of sense. It's about being open to new information, to different perspectives.
Oh, okay.
And then the video gets into this whole concept of the lies you tell yourself.
Yeah. Now, that might sound a bit dramatic,
It does.
but it's really about challenging this idea that we're always perfectly rational beings who make decisions based solely on logic.
Because we're not. Right. Our emotions play a huge role.
Oh, absolutely. Our emotions, our past experiences, our unconscious biases, all these things influence our beliefs and our decisions.
So how does the video suggest we unpack all that?
Well, they use this analogy of the brain as a master storyteller.
I remember that. That was a good one.
It's this idea that our brains are constantly trying to make sense of our experiences, to create a coherent narrative, even if that means rewriting the past or justifying our choices in ways that might not be entirely accurate.
So like the thing where you think of the perfect comeback hours after an argument.
Exactly. You're essentially rewriting history in your mind, creating a more satisfying version of the event.
So it makes us feel better, but it's not necessarily truth.
Right. And that self-deception, while it might protect our egos in the short term, can prevent us from learning from our mistakes and growing.
Right. We're not being honest with ourselves. So what's the problem with that? How can this internal storytelling backfire?
Well, for one thing, it can lead us to double down on bad decisions.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely done that.
We all have. But it can also make us more susceptible to manipulation by others.
Oh, interesting. How so?
If we're not aware of our own biases and blind spots, others who are more savvy can exploit those weaknesses.
So it's like we're walking around with these open targets on our backs and we don't even know it.
Kind of. The video specifically mentions marketers and politicians as examples of people who are skilled at using our own self-deceptions against us.
Right. They know how to push our buttons, how to appeal to our emotions, how to get us to act against our own best interests.
Exactly. So the key takeaway here is that self-awareness is essential for protecting ourselves from manipulation.
Self-awareness. Okay. So it's about constantly questioning our own motivations and biases.
Yeah. It's about being willing to shine a light on those darker corners of our minds and see what's really going on in there.
But that's hard work.
It is, but the video frames it as an investment, not a burden. It's about taking control of your own life, of your own thinking, rather than letting external forces dictate your beliefs and your choices.
So it's not about beating ourselves up for having biases. It's about being aware of them and then taking steps to mitigate their impact.
Precisely. It's about being mindful, about cultivating a sense of self-awareness, and about constantly questioning our own assumptions.
Okay, I like that. Mindful questioning. So moving on, the video then tackles this really interesting concept of the illusion of free thought.
Yeah, this one is kind of mind-bending.
Right. It really builds on this idea of external influences, but it goes deeper, like questioning how much of what we think of as our own unique perspective, our individuality, is actually shaped by our environment, our upbringing, our culture.
It really challenges us to think about where our beliefs and preferences actually come from.
Yeah, like how much of it is truly me versus just an echo of the people and the influences around me.
Right, like how much of your political stance, your taste in music, even your sense of style is genuinely your own creation versus just an absorption of the ideas and trends that you've been exposed to throughout your life.
Whoa, okay, now that you put it that way, it's pretty deep, right? I mean, how much of it is really us? And the video brings up this whole thing about humans having this ingrained instinct to follow the herd.
Oh yeah, the herd mentality. It's a powerful force.
And evolutionarily, it makes sense, right? Safety and numbers and all that.
Absolutely. In our evolutionary past, sticking with the group often meant survival. But in today's world, it can sometimes lead us astray.
So how does that play out, particularly in the age of social media? Because I feel like social media is almost like herd mentality on hyperdrive.
It is. Social media amplifies that tendency in a few ways. For one, the algorithms often create echo chambers, where we're mostly exposed to information and opinions that align with our own, reinforcing those existing beliefs.
Right, so we're just constantly surrounded by people who agree with us.
Exactly. And that can create a false sense of consensus, making us think that our views are more widely held than they actually are.
And the video also talks about how outrage spreads so quickly online, right? Like negativity and anger get so much more engagement, which just feeds into that whole cycle.
It does. Outrage is contagious, and it plays into those in-group biases,
Hmm.
making us more likely to demonize those who hold different views.
So it's like a double whammy. We're only seeing information that confirms our existing beliefs,
Yeah.
and then we're also being bombarded with negative, emotionally charged content that reinforces those biases.
And that's a recipe for polarization and division.
Right. Which is kind of where we are now, unfortunately.
So what's the key takeaway here?
Well, I guess it's that we need to be really mindful of how social media can manipulate our perceptions.
And we need to actively seek out diverse sources of information, to challenge our own echo chambers, and to be willing to engage with different perspectives in a respectful and open-minded way.
Yeah, I think that's crucial because if we're only ever exposed to one side of an issue, we're never going to develop a truly nuanced and informed understanding.
Exactly. We need to be able to see the issue from multiple angles, to consider different viewpoints, and to weigh the evidence carefully before forming our own opinions.
So the big question here, I guess, is how can we know if our beliefs are truly our own if we're constantly being influenced by all these external forces?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And the video suggests that the key is to constantly challenge ourselves, to question our assumptions, to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
And that brings us to another really important point that the video raises, the fear of being wrong.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. I think we've all experienced that feeling, that kind of sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize you've made a mistake or that your beliefs might be incorrect.
It's a natural human response.
Hmm.
We don't like to be wrong. It can feel embarrassing, like we're somehow less intelligent or capable.
And it can be really hard to admit when we're wrong, especially if we've been arguing a point really passionately.
Absolutely. But the video argues that this fear of being wrong can actually be a major obstacle to critical thinking.
How so?
Well, it can lead us to become defensive, to dig in our heels and refuse to even consider evidence that contradicts our beliefs.
Right, like we're more concerned with saving face than with actually getting to the truth.
Exactly. And that can lead us to make decisions that aren't in our best interests, or to cling to beliefs that are ultimately harmful.
The video gave some really interesting examples of that, like the flat earthers and the people who initially denied the link between smoking and cancer.
Yeah, those are great examples of how powerful that resistance to new information can be.
It's like those beliefs became part of their identity, so challenging them felt like a personal attack.
And that's why it's so important to be able to separate our egos from our beliefs.
To be able to say, okay, I might be wrong about this, without feeling like we're somehow less of a person.
Exactly. Because the truth is, the smartest people are often the ones who are most willing to admit when they're wrong.
Because they see it as an opportunity to learn and grow, right? Like, oh, I was wrong about that. Okay, well, now I know better, and I can adjust my thinking accordingly.
Precisely. It's a sign of intellectual humility, of a commitment to truth-seeking.
So how can we get better at being wrong? I mean, it's not exactly something we're taught in school.
It's a practice. It takes conscious effort to cultivate that willingness to be wrong. But the more we can do it, the more open-minded and intellectually flexible we become.
Right, so it's a muscle that we need to exercise. Okay, now the video also talks about escaping the echo chamber, which we touched on earlier with social media. But they delve a bit deeper into confirmation bias and how that contributes to this phenomenon.
Yeah, confirmation bias is a huge factor here. It's that natural tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring or downplaying evidence that contradicts them.
So it's like we're selectively filtering the information that comes our way.
Exactly. And that can lead us to live in these echo chambers where everyone around us agrees with us, reinforcing those beliefs even further.
And social media algorithms just amplify this, right?
Oh, absolutely. They learn our preferences and then feed us more of what they think we want to see, creating these personalized echo chambers that can be really hard to break out of.
And that can lead to some pretty serious problems, right? Like increased polarization and even hostility towards people who hold different views.
It's one of the biggest challenges we face today. When we only interact with people who agree with us, we lose the ability to see the world from other perspectives, and that can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings and conflicts.
So how do we break out of these echo chambers?
Well, it takes conscious effort. We need to actively seek out diverse sources of information, to challenge our own assumptions, and to be willing to engage with people who hold different views.
And not just engage, but actually listen with an open mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about trying to convert people to our way of thinking. It's about understanding where they're coming from and why they believe what they believe.
Yeah, because often there's more common ground than we might realize.
Absolutely. We just need to be willing to look for it.
So, shifting gears a bit, the video then talks about the art of asking better questions. And they make this point that it's not about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions.
It's a really important distinction because often the questions we ask are more important than the answers we find.
Why is that?
Because the right questions can help us to challenge our assumptions, to see things from a different perspective, and to uncover new insights that we might have otherwise missed.
It's like they say, the quality of your life depends on the quality of the questions you ask.
Exactly. And the video highlights some of history's greatest thinkers, like Socrates and Einstein, who were known for their relentless questioning.
Right, they weren't afraid to challenge the status quo, to ask the why and the how behind everything.
And that curiosity, that willingness to question everything, is what allowed them to make such profound contributions to human knowledge.
So the key takeaway here is to be more curious, to ask more questions, and to not be afraid to challenge our own beliefs and assumptions.
Exactly. Because often the things we take for granted are the things that are most worth questioning.
Okay, moving on. The video then delves into this idea of breaking free from mental shortcuts. And as we discussed earlier, our brains love those shortcuts, those cognitive biases that help us to process information quickly and efficiently.
They're essential for everyday functioning. But, as we've seen, they can also lead us astray.
Right, so it's about recognizing when those shortcuts are helpful and when they're actually hindering our ability to think critically.
Exactly. And the video highlights some of the most common and potentially dangerous biases.
Like the halo effect.
Right. That's where we let a positive impression in one area influence our judgments in other areas.
So if someone is attractive, we might also assume they're intelligent or trustworthy.
Exactly. Yeah. And conversely, there's the horn effect, where a negative impression in one area taints our overall view of a person.
Right, so if someone is clumsy, we might assume they're also not very smart.
It's unfair, but it's a common bias. And then there's the availability heuristic, where we overestimate the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall examples of it.
Oh, like thinking that shark attacks are more common than drowning because shark attacks get so much media attention?
Exactly. Our brains tend to prioritize information that is readily available, even if it's not statistically representative of reality.
So how do we counter these biases? It seems like they're so deeply ingrained in how our brains work.
It takes conscious effort, but we can train ourselves to be more aware of these biases and to slow down our judgments.
So taking a pause, asking ourselves if our initial reaction is based on solid evidence or just on what's easily accessible in our minds.
Exactly. And being willing to consider alternative perspectives and to challenge our own assumptions.
Okay, and then we get into the power of manipulation, which is kind of a scary topic. The video argues that we're constantly being influenced and manipulated in ways that we're not even aware of.
It's not always malicious, but it's definitely something to be aware of. Because there are a lot of people and institutions that are trying to influence our thinking and our behavior, often for their own benefit.
Right, like advertisers, marketers, politicians, even the media, they're all vying for our attention and trying to shape our perceptions.
And they use a variety of tactics to do so, from subtle psychological cues to overt propaganda.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. The layout of stores is often designed to encourage impulse purchases. The colors used in fast food branding are chosen to stimulate appetite. The placement of essential items in supermarkets forces us to walk past countless other products, increasing the likelihood that we'll buy something we don't need.
That's all very strategic.
It is. And then there's political advertising,
Yeah.
which often plays on our fears and insecurities to sway our opinions.
Right, it's all about appealing to our emotions rather than our rational minds.
Exactly. And the media can also be guilty of manipulation, even if it's unintentional. The way they frame a story, the language they use, the experts they choose to interview, all these things can influence how we perceive an issue.
And they talked about the illusion of choice, right? How we can be presented with what seems like a wide range of options, but in reality, the underlying framing is quite limited.
Right. So we think we're making a free and informed choice, but in reality, the choices have already been narrowed down for us.
So it's all about being more aware of these subtle forms of influence, right?
Absolutely. We need to be critical consumers of information, to question our assumptions, and to be willing to look beyond the surface.
And that's where critical thinking comes in, right? It's the antidote to manipulation.
It is. Critical thinking allows us to see through the smoke and mirrors, to evaluate information objectively, and to make decisions that are in our own best interests.
Okay, now the video has this section called How to Win Any Argument, but it's not really about winning, is it?
No, not at all. The focus is on using arguments as opportunities for learning and growth, both for ourselves and for the people we're arguing with.
So it's not about dominating the other person or proving them wrong.
Right. It's about engaging in a respectful and productive dialogue that allows both parties to share their perspectives, to challenge each other's assumptions, and to potentially come to a new understanding.
And the first rule they lay out is to stop trying to win. That seems counterintuitive, but I get it.
It's about shifting the focus from proving ourselves right to actually listening to the other person and trying to understand their point of view.
Right, because if we're too busy trying to score points, we're not really going to be open to what the other person has to say.
Exactly. So instead of trying to win, the video suggests that we should focus on asking questions and encouraging the other person to elaborate on their reasoning.
Okay, so it's about turning the argument into a collaborative exploration of the issue.
Exactly. And that can often lead to both parties gaining a deeper understanding of the topic, even if they don't ultimately agree.
They also talk about controlling the frame and using the other person's own logic against them. What do those mean?
Controlling the frame is about keeping the discussion focused on the core issues and not letting it get sidetracked by tangents or personal attacks.
Right, staying on topic and avoiding those emotional rabbit holes.
Exactly. And using the other person's logic against them is about listening carefully to their arguments and then gently pointing out any inconsistencies or contradictions in their reasoning.
So it's not about attacking them, it's about helping them to see the flaws in their own thinking.
Exactly. And that can be a much more effective way to change someone's mind than simply telling them they're wrong.
And then the final rule is knowing when to walk away from an argument.
That's an important one because sometimes, no matter how hard we try, the other person is just not willing to engage in a good faith dialogue.
Right, like if they're just being stubborn or closed-minded.
Exactly. And in those cases, it's best to just disengage and move on.
Because it's not worth the energy or the frustration. Okay, then, the video circles back to the lies we tell ourselves. But this time, with a focus on those internal obstacles that can hold us back from pursuing our goals or even just feeling good about ourselves.
Yeah, these are the negative self-beliefs that we all struggle with from time to time.
Right, like, I'm not good enough, I'll never succeed, it's too late for me.
All those limiting beliefs, they can really sabotage our efforts.
And the video makes a really interesting point about the brain's natural preference for self-preservation over self-improvement.
It's like our brains are trying to protect us from discomfort or potential failure, even if that means staying stuck in our comfort zones.
So it's like this internal battle between our desire to grow and our fear of the unknown.
Exactly. And often that fear wins out.
So how do we overcome those self-limiting beliefs?
The video suggests that we need to start by recognizing them for what they are: beliefs, not facts.
Right, because just because we think something doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. And once we've identified those negative thoughts, we can start to challenge them.
Like asking ourselves for evidence to support those beliefs.
Or considering alternative perspective.
Right, like, okay, I think I'm not good enough. But is that really true? What evidence do I have to support that belief? And what are some other ways of looking at the situation?
Exactly. It's about turning those negative thoughts into opportunities for reflection and growth.
Okay, then the video takes a step back and looks at some of the bigger picture influences that shape our thinking, those hidden forces that we might not even be aware of.
Yeah, this is where we get into things like social conditioning, confirmation bias, and emotional conditioning.
Right, those invisible scripts that are running in the background of our minds.
Exactly. And they can have a profound impact on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
So social conditioning, that's all about the messages we've received from our families, our communities, our culture, right?
Right. It's all the things that we've been taught about how we're supposed to think, feel, and act.
And those messages can be really powerful, especially if we've been exposed to them from a young age.
They can. They can shape our beliefs about everything from gender roles to success to what it means to be a good person.
And then there's confirmation bias, which we talked about earlier. That's our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if it means ignoring evidence to the contrary.
Right. It's like we're wearing these mental blinders that filter out anything that doesn't fit our worldview.
And finally, there's emotional conditioning, which is where our past experiences shape our emotional responses in the present.
So if we've had a negative experience in the past, we might be more likely to react with fear or anxiety in a similar situation in the future, even if the circumstances are different.
Right. It's like our emotions are running on autopilot.
Exactly. And that can lead us to make decisions that aren't in our best interests.
So what's the key takeaway here? How do we deal with these hidden forces that are shaping our thinking?
The video suggests that the first step is awareness. We need to recognize that these forces are at play and that they're influencing our thoughts and feelings.
Right, because if we're not aware of them, we can't do anything to counter them.
Exactly. And once we're aware of them, we can start to question them.
Like, where did this belief come from? Is it still serving me? Does it align with my values?
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our own thinking and not letting ourselves be controlled by these unconscious forces.
Okay, and finally, the video concludes with a really inspiring message about the courage to think for yourself.
It's a powerful message, and it really sums up the whole point of critical thinking.
Right, because it's not just about being smart or knowing a lot of facts.
It's about having the courage to challenge the status quo, to think for yourself, and to stand up for what you believe in, even if it's unpopular.
And that takes guts, right? Because we're constantly being pressured to conform, to fit in, to not rock the boat.
It does. But the video reminds us that many of the greatest thinkers throughout history were the ones who dared to be different, to question everything, and to forge their own paths.
Right, people like Galileo, who challenged the geocentric view of the universe, or Martin Luther King Jr., who fought for racial equality.
They were all willing to go against the grain, to risk ridicule and rejection, because they believed in something bigger than themselves.
So the message here is that we all have that potential within us.
We do. We just need to find the courage to tap into it.
And that's not always easy, but the rewards can be immense.
They can. Because when we think for ourselves, we're not just following the crowd, we're creating our own paths. And that's where true freedom lies.
So we've come full circle, back to that initial crossroads that the video described.
Right. The choice between the easy path of conformity and the harder, but ultimately more rewarding path of independent thought.
And the video makes it clear that critical thinking is the key to navigating that path.
It is. Critical thinking gives us the tools we need to question our assumptions, to evaluate information objectively, and to make decisions that are in alignment with our own values and goals.
So it's not just about being smart, it's about being empowered.
Exactly. It's about taking control of our own thinking and shaping our own destinies.
And that's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final question to ponder.
Okay, hit us with it.
Are you going to remain in that state of unconscious acceptance? Or are you going to actively take back control of your own mind?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of everything we've been talking about.
It does, because the truth is, the world needs more critical thinkers, more people who are willing to question everything, to challenge the status quo, and to think for themselves.
Absolutely. The future depends on it.
So that's our challenge to you, our listener. Go out there and be a critical thinker. The world needs you.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time. Until then.